Welcome all to the course Web Design for Beginners. I'm Kulani Mahadeva, a lecturer at the University of Maratona. In this lesson, I'm going to introduce you JavaScript. Before moving forward, let's take a moment to get familiar with the standard color coding scheme we have been using throughout this course. I hope you have followed the HTML and CSS lessons before coming here. So, can you recall something you felt missing in the website you created with HTML and CSS? Okay, let me help you. Think about the time you have visited a museum. What did you do there? You must have walked around and watched the things in the museum. Can you remember whether you tried to move or interact with them? No, generally you are not allowed to do that. That means the content in the museum is static. Again, think about the time you were reading a newspaper. A newspaper contains text and images or photos. Sometimes we can find some puzzles or forms. You may fill them up too. But still, if you think, the content of the newspaper is also static. Okay, I think now you got the point. The website you created with HTML and CSS is also static. The content and the styles. Sometimes we find it a little bit boring to visit such a website. That is why we require another technology for web designing called JavaScript. JavaScript can make your website lively. What does that mean? You can think about it as visiting a street food market. What can you do there? You can select and buy the food you like. You can also request to customize based on your preferences. The sellers are also very responsive. You can see them cooking too. So, a street food market is a very dynamic and interactive place. Similarly, if you use JavaScript to design your website, you can make it dynamic and interactive too. Let's take a concrete example to see how we can use JavaScript for web designing. We are familiar with data collection forms. The traditional approach is to use a pen and paper. With the World Wide Web, we can perform such tasks through web applications. As of now, you know how to create a simple form like this using HTML and CSS. So what happens here? You type down the answers in the given text boxes. Then you click on the submit button. For now, let's focus on the filling part. You could see that it's no different than filling the paper form because the content is static. This is the source of the web page. You can see that it's written with plain HTML and CSS. Now let's see how we can make our form looks alive with JavaScript. Here, can you see some text is dynamically displayed when the user clicks on the input boxes? That is some helper text to provide additional information to guide the user. I hope now you understand how the content can be dynamically changed based on user interactions. Now, what are the changes to the web page source? We need to add some JavaScript code. So what is JavaScript and how is it different from HTML and CSS? We already know what HTML is. It is about the content of the web page. HTML is called a markup language because it uses tags to tell the browser how the content is displayed. We already know what CSS is too. It is about the presentation. CSS is called a style sheet language. It changes the properties such as color and positioning of HTML text. So, what is JavaScript? It is the programming language of the web. That means it provides a set of rules or instructions to the browser to perform a task based on user interactions or user inputs that will change the content or the presentation of the web page. For an example, we can ask the browser to change the background color of an HTML tag when the user clicks on it, like this. So what makes JavaScript different from HTML and CSS languages? JavaScript uses variables, functions, loops, and conditions to implement the instructions. So in this lesson series, we are going to learn basics of JavaScript programming. Welcome all to the course Web Design for Beginners. I am Kulani Mahadeva, a lecturer at the University of Moratuwa. In this lesson, I am going to introduce the document object model, then classes and objects in JavaScript. Before moving forward, let's take a moment to get familiar with the standard color coding scheme we have been using throughout this course. In the previous lesson, we learned that JavaScript can dynamically change the content of a web page through programming. So, did you see any challenge for JavaScript to achieve this? To understand the challenge, let's take our subjects: HTML and JavaScript. HTML is a markup language. JavaScript is a programming language. It sounds like there are two different languages. It's indeed correct. JavaScript does not understand HTML because HTML uses tags to communicate with the browser. So there's a gap between HTML and JavaScript. So what can we do to overcome this gap? We need a bridge. In web designing, HTML DOM is the bridge between HTML and JavaScript. DOM includes everything in the HTML document, but in a way, JavaScript understands it. To understand this, let's take an example. Here we have some text between paragraph tag. In the HTML DOM, we have an object corresponding to this paragraph tag. Assume that we want to change the color of this paragraph to yellow using JavaScript. To achieve this, JavaScript accesses this paragraph tag object and changes its color property to yellow. Then the browser updates the web page to reflect the changes to the DOM. So what is DOM? DOM stands for Document Object Model. It simply structures a document as a tree. What does that mean? A tree structure means it looks like a tree. Let's take a simple example to see how we can get the tree structure. The root node of the DOM tree is the HTML tag. It includes the complete HTML document. Within the HTML tags, we have head and body. In the DOM tree, they are the two main branches of root node. In the head tag, also we have two tags, meta and title. In the DOM tree, they are the branches of the node head. Similarly, in the body tag, here we have two tags, A for link and P for paragraph. In the DOM tree, they are the branches of the node body. Okay, we added all the HTML tags as nodes to the DOM tree. Now we need to add attributes and text also to the DOM tree. In the meta tag, we have one attribute, that is charset. We add it as a leaf nodes to that branch. In the title tag, we have text. We add that also as a leaf node to that branch. Similarly, we add all the attributes and text in other tags also as leaf nodes to that corresponding branch. Alright, now we got the complete DOM tree structure of our HTML document. But do we have to generate this every time we create a web page? No, we don't have to worry because our browser generates it for us. Generally, the DOM tree structures from top to bottom like this. The HTML tags or element nodes are in blue, orange, and yellow colors. The attribute nodes are in dark green. The text nodes are in light green. Okay. This DOM tree is also called an object-oriented representation of a document. That means DOM is based on the concept of objects. What is an object? I'll come back to it later. For now, can you guess what are the objects in the DOM tree? Here, all the HTML tags or element nodes are considered as objects. The attributes and text are properties of the objects. Now let's see how JavaScript accesses this DOM to change the web page. To understand it, let's take this example. In this HTML document, we have a paragraph tag with ID attribute equal to PID. Currently, this tag is empty. Assume we want to change the paragraph text to hello. Currently, the web page looks like this. We want to change it to this page with hello text. This is the DOM tree of the HTML document. Now we need to add some JavaScript code. We add JavaScript code within the script tags. To access the DOM, we use the DOM API or the application programming interface provided by the browser. We first access the root element. It is the document object. It contains the complete HTML document, but we are interested in only the paragraph tag. To access the paragraph tag, we need to use a function provided by the document object called getElementById. We can give the value of the ID attribute of paragraph tag in the brackets. Then it provides us with the relevant paragraph tag object. Next, we want to change the text content of the paragraph tag. For that, we access a property called text content in the paragraph tag object. We can set the value of the text content as hello like this. Here we go, the DOM gets updated. Now if you refresh the browser, you can see the hello text appears. Okay, now we know what DOM is and how JavaScript accesses it. But how exactly JavaScript understands objects? Let's take a look at. First of all, what is an object? You can think about an object as anything you find in everyday life. It could be a table, a chair, a cat, a building, a person, or just anything. Let's take car object as an example. Can you describe it? The color of this car is blue. The model is R8. The brand is Audi. Then this car can accelerate and brake. If you think what list on your left side are properties of this car, on the right side we have behaviors. Now let's take a look at what objects in JavaScript are. JavaScript is an object-oriented programming language. In short, we call it a OOP language. Objects in OOP languages model real-world objects, so they also have properties and behaviors. Let's take a look at how JavaScript models the objects. In our car example, we listed a set of properties and behaviors. We can represent the same thing in JavaScript like this. I think you can almost understand this because JavaScript is a high-level language. That means it is easy to read and write by human. However, to tell the browser, we need to use JavaScript syntax. It is very similar to how humans use grammar rules to understand a language like Sinhala or English. What you see in this JavaScript code is an assignment statement. On the left-hand side of the equal operator, it creates a variable called car using the keyword let. On the right-hand side, it assigns the value of the object as a block of code. You can see that the object has more than one value. The object includes all the properties of the car as key value pairs and behaviors as functions. I will come back to variables and functions of JavaScript in the next lesson. Okay, now you know how to model objects in JavaScript. But what can we do with this object? We can access this object in the rest of the JavaScript code to use it or change its state. So how can we access the object? We can use dot notation. To access an object property, we can use the object name dot property name. For an example, car.color or car.model. To access an object behavior, we can use the object name dot function name. For an example, car.accelerate, car.brake. Now let's see what a class in JavaScript is. First, we need to understand why we need classes. For that, let's take the same car example. Here we have the blue car object. Assume we need to define another car object but only a change in the color property like this. This is red car object. If we write a new object from scratch, that will result in redundant code. So what can we do to reuse code? In JavaScript, the concept of class allows code reuse. It allows specifying common properties and behaviors under the class. Then objects are created by giving specific values to the properties. Coming back to our example, can you guess a suitable class for these two objects? We can call it car class. Here is the JavaScript class for our example. The keyword class tells the browser that this block of code is a class called car. Inside the class, we write a mandatory function called the construct. This function sets values to the properties. Here, the constructor sets only the color property. You can call this constructor function by using the keyword new when creating objects from this class. To create the first object, I give the value blue. So the object sets the value of color property as blue when creating this object. To create the second object, I give the value red. Similarly, this also sets the color property of this object as red. Like this, we can easily create objects with one line if we use classes. Okay, so this is about JavaScript classes. In the next lesson, let's learn about variables and functions in JavaScript. Welcome all to the course Web Design for Beginners. I'm Kulani Mahadeva, a lecturer at the University of Moratuwa. In this lesson, I'm going to introduce variables and functions in JavaScript. Before moving forward, let's take a moment to get familiar with the standard color coding scheme we have been using throughout this course. Now, we know that JavaScript is a programming language. In programming languages, we use variables. Do you know why? To understand it, let's take an example. Food and beverages are essential to humans. So, we put them in containers and store them in somewhere like in a refrigerator. We put labels on the containers so we know what is inside. We also can change the content of a container with another food item. Similarly, computer programs consume data. So, we need a way to store them. For that, we use variables. You can think about the food container as a variable and the refrigerator as memory. So, computer programs put data in variables and store them in the memory. The label on the container is similar to the name of the variable. Okay, now you know that JavaScript uses variables to store data. Then the data stored in these variables can change. So what type of data can we store in these variables? If we take a food example, we know that there are different types of food like fruits, vegetables, dairy. That means orange belongs to the food type fruit. Similarly, JavaScript supports different types of data like numbers, strings, and objects. For an example, if we take 24, that belongs to the data type numbers. Then any characters or numbers within double quotes is a string. In the previous lesson, we learnt about JavaScript objects. So objects are also another data type. Here the person object belongs to the data type object. Now let's see how to use these variables in JavaScript programming. To understand easily, let's take an example. Here we have a game screen. In that we have the text, Hello Alice. Now we need to do this using JavaScript. So the task here is to display hello, then username. We know that username changes depending on the logged in user. Generally, the user provides a preferred username. Now we know that we need to use a variable to store that username. So in our JavaScript code, let's create a variable called username. To create a variable, we use the keyword var, then the variable name. It is similar to labeling your food container. Next, we need to store the data value in the variable. For now, let's give data value as Alice here. This step assigns the value Alice to the variable using the equal operator. It is similar to how you put food in the food container. Okay, next we want to display this text on the screen. Can you think of a way to do it? In our previous lesson, we learned JavaScript interacts with the DOM API to change the web pages. Then we change the text of a paragraph tag using DOM API calls. We can use the same code here. I assume the same paragraph tag exists here. There's a difference here in the value we assign. To display the username, we need to access the variable that stores the username. For that, we directly put the variable name. In our analogy, this is the label name of the container. So it is similar to setting your food container by the label name. Okay, I think now you understand the basic idea of variables and how to use them. So let's move on to the functions in JavaScript. First of all, let's see why we need functions. I'm going to use the same example but with an addition. Here we need to display a greeting text on the screen. You can also do this yourself because it's very similar to the first task. So this is our JavaScript code. Similar to the previous, we have created a variable named greeting. Then give good morning as the value. Finally, we use the same DOM API call to set the text of the paragraph tag. The only change in the DOM API call is the ID of the paragraph tag and the assigned value, which is greeting. Here, we assume the existence of another paragraph tag with the ID attribute as PID2. So can you see any issue here? To call the DOM API, we have almost used the same line of code. Also, the line is too long. So our code here looks complex. What can we do to solve this? To solve this, we can use functions. Our task here is to display some text on the game screen. So let's assume we have a function called display. In our JavaScript code, we remove the line which display the text. Then we call the display function. This function takes two inputs. They are the ID attribute and the text to display. The ID attribute tells where to display. The text is what to display. Now can you see our code became simple? So this is one of the objectives of using functions. Here's our example function. It is like a black box to us. That means we do not know what is inside. In our program, it is a block of code. However, it performs a task, that is, displaying text on the game screen. In the previous example, we saw how it simplifies our code by reducing redundant code. Okay, function is like a black box when we use it. JavaScript provides many predefined functions like that. For an example, the function getElementById is a function provided by the DOM API. However, if we define a function, we need to implement it. In our example, we assume there's a function called display. So we need to implement this. So let's see how to implement a function. In JavaScript, we use the keyword function to tell the browser that the particular block of code is a function. Next to function, we give the function name. We can use any meaningful name. So here I use display as name. We specify the inputs within parentheses. The inputs are variables. But here we do not use the keyword var. Then the block of code, also called the function body, implements the task. Now can you write the function body? You already know how to display text on the web page using JavaScript. Previously we used the DOM API call. We can use the same here. In the same statement, we replace the values with input variables. Alright, now we are done. I hope now you understand the use of variables and functions in JavaScript. In the next lesson, let's learn about events in JavaScript. Welcome all to the course Web Design for Beginners. I am Kulani Mahadeva, a lecturer at the University of Moratuwa. In this lesson, I am going to give an introduction to events. Before moving forward, let's take a moment to get familiar with the standard color coding scheme we have been using throughout this course. We often hear the word event when it comes to programming. Why do we need events? Let's take an example. I think most of you have an experience like this. Touching a hot object gives a quick reaction in which you let go of it. The so-called stimulus here is the event. In response to the event, you let go of the object. Not only humans react to events. In your childhood, you might have played with this plant which goes to sleep when you touch it. Similarly, some plants catch insects when they land on them. These are some extreme examples. Plants react to simple events like sunlight too. What can we take from this? All living things react to events. The events originate from the internal or external environments. So let's take a look at how we can use events for JavaScript programming. Our websites contain HTML elements like forms, menus, and buttons. Users interact with them. You can see here the user hover mouse over the menu. It results in this display menu items. Then he clicks on a menu item. Again he clicks on an image. Then hovers mouse over the image. It results in enlarging the image. So you can see here the website responds to events by dynamically changing the content and presentation. This response is the reaction of the JavaScript code to events. Okay, now can you tell what an event is? It is an action or an occurrence that happens in a computer system. On websites, event occurs when the user interacts with the page elements. For an example, the user clicks on the form buttons or menu items. An event could be an internal action by the browser too. The page load event is an example. When the event happens, the system signals it to our JavaScript program. Then in response, JavaScript executes some code. The results could be, for an example, displaying some new content on the web page. So this is about events. In the next lesson, let's see how JavaScript reacts to events.
Hello everyone. Welcome to your course Web Design for Beginners. I am Yasasri Vikramasinghe, a former lead software engineer, and also currently I am working as a lecturer at University of Moratuwa. Today, we are going to discuss handling events in JavaScript. I hope you remember what you have learned in the previous lecture. There, we discussed the basics of JavaScript events. Today, we will be looking into the practical aspects of handling these events. You are already familiar that we are using a color coding to make our slides more easier to understand. Please go through this color coding because this is applicable for this lesson as well. You are going to learn how to use JavaScript events in web designing. This is a practical session, so I encourage you all to open your IDE, or you can use CodePen, our online editor, and you can code with me. Now we are going to look at how to handle events in JavaScript in practical manner. Let me create a simple HTML page first. There are head tags and also we have body tags, opening body tag and ending body tag. And let's add a title. Maybe let's say JavaScript events. Now this is a simple HTML page. I'm going to add a JavaScript code now. I will add it under body tags. Now we are already familiar with JavaScript. So I added a script tag and let's name this as language. It's JavaScript and type text and JavaScript. All right. Next, what I'm going to do is I will create a simple JavaScript function. I will give this function name as click event, a simple function name. You can give whatever function name that you like. And inside the function, I'm going to add document.write. Document.write means you can embed some third-party text content into your HTML code. So your document is your document, HTML document. You are going to insert a new text content by triggering this function. Inside brackets, we'll say hello all. You can give whatever a text you need. Right. Now we have created a function and this function will insert this text into your HTML document as a new content. But now you need to have a trigger point or you need to call this function to execute. For that, I will create a simple button and I will configure a JavaScript event. When you click the button, you can fire this function. Let's see how you can do it. Here, I will add a simple form element. You are already familiar with these tags. Then I will add a button. So how to add a button? It's input type and it's button. Then on click. Now on click is the JavaScript event. This is very important. So this is the event. This is a built-in JavaScript function. Using this on click event, you can detect whether your button is clicked or not. If an user clicking on your button, this event can track it. After tracking, you can give any action. What should you do next after triggering this event? So in our case, if a user clicking on this button, we need to call this event. So what we are going to do? We are giving this function name. We are giving this function name. Our function name is click event. So I gave this function. If your function name is ABC, you will give ABC here. But this is the event. This is the on-click event that we are using. This is the beauty of JavaScript. Using this on-click, you can trigger, you can call any function like this. We are using our own function here. Then we will give a value to our button. Let's say click. Let's say click this button. This is the button label actually. You can give any name you want. Now we have done our JavaScript event creation. I will show how this is going to look like in a browser. Let's open. Okay, so this is our website, simple website we created. We have this button, click this button. Now look at when I click this button, we should be able to add a new line. Now I'm going to click this. Now you saw after I clicking it, I'm getting this text. How we are getting this text? Because when an user clicking on this button, there's a JavaScript event, on click event. There we are calling this function. So this function is adding this particular line to our document. Document.write, and we are adding this line. That is why you are seeing this particular new text. This is a simple JavaScript event that I showed to you. I invite you to play more and do your own creative stuff with this on-click event. Next, we'll look into another JavaScript event. In this event, I am not using on-click event, but I am using another JavaScript event called on mouse over. Now this is another event, but this is not click event. Now let's see what this is going to do, and then I'll explain how it works. Now we have the same web page and we have the button, but when I bring my mouse pointer to this button, now you can see even before I click the button, I get this text. How it happens? Because this event, on mouse hover event, will denote whether your mouse is closer and on top of the button. If so, your JavaScript can call this function even before you click it. Right? Even before you click it, you can call your function. See, I'm not clicking. I'm just taking my mouse pointer into this button. And here you go. You can see this function is triggering. Now, instead of a button, you can do this for many other HTML tags. Even you can do this for simple paragraph tag. I will add a simple paragraph tag and a text like see the magic, right? This is a simple text. Now, for this paragraph tag, I will add the same event on mouse over. When your mouse is over this paragraph tag, you can call your function name. Now we are giving our function name here, and that's it. I'll reload my page. Now we have a simple paragraph tag, and see, when I'm taking my mouse just to my paragraph, you will see the text is automatically appearing. Now this is another very cool JavaScript event. I will show one more example. Next, I'm going to introduce another JavaScript event. Now for that, I will add a simple input field. Simple input field. Here, I will add a simple text box. Alright, simple text box. So earlier we added input type as a button. Now I'm adding a simple text box. For the text box, you have type as text, and I will give an ID, and then this is the JavaScript event that we are discussing as the third one. It's called onKeyDown. onKeyDown. There, what happens is, now this is a text box. Now, when you press a key, keyboard key, you can call any JavaScript function. That is what we are going to do here. This is a JavaScript event onKeyDown. By using this event, we are triggering and calling this function. I will show how this is going to work. Now we have this input box, and we have this function already created. Click event. I will show you our output. Now here we have input box. This is input box. Now when I take my mouse pointer, nothing happens. When I click it, nothing happens. But if I press any key on my keyboard, now I'm going to press a key. Now soon after I click a key, you can see our function is working. Why you need these events? You can do any kind of JavaScript work because you are calling a function. So within this function, even you can play videos, you can do animations, you can even do some calculations, you can do whatever a JavaScript work because simply you are calling a function. With that, you can do a lot of stuff. So I encourage you to read more, check our further reading section, and I hope you enjoyed learning JavaScript event handling. Today we discuss some of the JavaScript events, but remember there are a lot. This table shows some more JavaScript events, and also you can further refer many more. I will link those in our further reading section. With that, we are concluding our lesson for today, and I can't wait to see you in the next one. Thank you.
Hi everyone, welcome all to the course Web Design for Beginners. I am Lahir Vijayasekara, a Solutions Architect at Nagaro and a visiting lecturer. In this lesson, I am going to introduce you to loops and conditions. Let's look at important color coding. These color codings will help us to understand preceding lectures. We are going to discuss the structure of a loop today. A loop is a sequence of instructions that is continuously repeated until a certain condition is reached. If you have a set of actions to do repeatedly in your solution, that requires having a loop. Let's take a real-world example. Your music playlist can be considered as a loop. While you have a song that is available to be played, it will keep going through your song list and stop when there is no more music that can be listened to. What are the different kinds of loops? First one, the for loop. This loops through a block of code a number of times. The second one, for in loop. This loops through the properties of an object. The third one, for of loop. This loops through the values of an enumerable object. Fourth one, while loop. This loops through a block of code while a specific condition is true. The last one, do while loop. This also loops through a block of code while a specific condition is true. Let's take a look at for loop. The for loop starts with statement 1. This initializes a variable to be started the loop. Statement 2 carries a condition to be checked. This can be a logical statement that returns a Boolean value. Statement 3 is managing the increment. The code block can be any logic that we need to run repeatedly. We can have a look at the structure of the for loop again. Statement 1 is executed before the execution of the code block. Statement 2 defines the condition for executing the code block. Statement 3 is executed after the code block has been executed. Let's look at a written for loop in JavaScript. The term let is used to define a variable in JavaScript. The let keyword was introduced in ES6, that is in 2015. We initialize variable I to 0. Then we do the condition to check whether the value of I is less than 5. Then we move to the loop body. The loop body contains a message to be displayed with the value of the variable I. The next step is the I++, which increments the value of the variable I. The same set of steps repeats until the value of I becomes 5. Let's look at for in loop. This looks similar to the for loop. The JavaScript for in statement loops through the properties of an object. If you look at this program carefully, there is an array of integers in the first line. The array values carry fine integer values. A blank string has been assigned to the variable text in line number 3. For loop starts to traverse through the array and add value to the text. The next loop is the for of loop. The JavaScript for statement loops through the values of an iterable object. It lets you loop over iterable data structures such as arrays, strings, maps, node lists, and many more. Let's look at the example. The animal is an array that carries 3 string values which are cat, dog, and parrot. A blank value has been assigned to the variable which is text. The for loop is used to traverse through the array and assign the taken values to x in each iteration to the variable text here. The while loop. The while loop loops through a block of code as long as a specific condition is true. If you carefully look at the condition of the while loop, you can see that the condition is to check whether the value of I is less than 10. The loop can repeat until the value of x becomes 10 with the increment which is I++. Conditional statements. Conditional statements control the behavior of the program. It determines whether pieces of code can run depending on the decision that has been taken. Let's take a real-world example of an incident where you must turn your vehicle in a junction. This is where you need to make a decision based on your target destination. This is a good example for you to understand the conditional statements. If you look at the condition here, this directs the application to run the next code blocks based on the decision of if. Let's look at the program now. This program has written to assign a message based on age. The if statement is used to check whether the value of variable age is less than 18. If the condition becomes true, the string value which is not an adult will be assigned to the variable message. Else, the value which is an adult will be assigned to the same. Let's look at the summary for loops. First one, the for loop. This loops through a block of code a number of times. Second one, for in loop. This loops through the properties of an object. Third one, for of loop. This loops through the values of an enumerable object. Fourth one, while loop. This loops through a block of code while a specific condition is true. The last one, do while loop. This also loops through a block of code while a specific condition is true. That's all for this session. Let's meet in another session. Thank you. Hi everyone, welcome all to the course Web Design for Beginners. I'm Lahir Vijayasekara, a solutions architect at Nagaro and a visiting lecturer. In this lesson, I'm going to introduce you to handling forms with input fields and checkboxes, radio buttons, and validations. You'll be able to handle web forms better in web development with the skills of this section. Let's look at the important color coding. These color codings will help you in preceding lectures. Let's look at handling forms. HTML form validation can be done by JavaScript. This is a way to manipulate the HTML. A JavaScript function can be used to validate a HTML form easily. Let's look at this example. We have an input field that requires validation. A JavaScript validation can be applied for this field. Let's look at input field validation. This JavaScript has been written to specifically track the name field of the HTML form and validate the input values. If you look at the line number 6, the function validate form has been written to validate the field. The script executes with a button click of the form. If you look at the line number 14, it has written to call the validated form function at onSubmit event. Let's try to understand the validation function. The name of the function can be seen in the first line as validate form. The second line uses to access the value of the HTML form, which is fname. Then the if statements check whether the taken value from HTML form is empty or not. If the value is empty, it displays the message as name must be filled out. Then it returns false as a Boolean value. A checkbox can also be validated using JavaScript. Here, there is a value to check. Then it can be submitted by the submit button. The requirement is to validate before submitting the value. Let's focus on this code base. The JavaScript has been embedded into the HTML to manage the checkbox validation. Line number 6 has assigned the value captured from the HTML form with the element ID form here. Line number 7 and 8 also have assigned the value of the element of the checkbox and the element ID of the message. It has tried to look for the value of the checkbox in line number 12. It checks whether the checkbox value has returned a true or a false value with the if condition. If the value is true, it returns a message as done. Else it returns a value as please check something. Radio button validation. This can also be done with the support of a JavaScript. The function validate form has been written to manage the form validation. If you carefully look at the line number 7, it has checked the value assigned to the radio button. If the value is false, in checking the gender, it prompts a message which is please choose your gender, male or female. Let's look at the summary. We discussed below topics. First one, handling forms. Second one, input field validation. Third one, checkbox validation. The last one, radio button validation. Let's meet in the next session. Thank you. Hi everyone, welcome all to the course Web Design for Beginners. I'm Lahir Vijayasekara, a solutions architect at Nagaro and a visiting lecturer. In this section, I am going to discuss JavaScript error handling. Let's look at the important color coding. This color coding will help you in preceding lecture slides. A JavaScript may end up with different errors in executing. Errors can be coding errors, maybe by the programmer, errors due to wrong input, and other unforeseeable things. Here you can see an example of an exception. You can learn that These errors are not for a non-technical person to read. Let's look at a way to handle these errors. A try-catch. This is one of the best ways to handle an error. The try block tries to execute unless it meets a problem or an exception. If it finds an exception, it catches the exception and handles the exception in a better way. If you look at this example, you can find a try block starts in my function. It tries to execute the code block which is in the try section. If it is unable to run smoothly, it goes to catch a statement to catch the exception. There is a proper message has form to be given to the end user. The final statement lets you execute the code, even after trying and catching it regardless of the result. This is an example of how to use the finally with try-catch. The finally section only executes after trying and catching. It has no dependency on what has happened in the try and catch. Here it has tried to get the value of an element with the element ID demo. The range error. A range error is thrown if we use a value outside the range. You cannot set the number of significant digits of a number to 500. Reference error. A reference error is thrown if you use a variable that has not been declared. If you look at the example, the variable y cannot be used as it has not been declared in the program. Syntax error. A syntax error is thrown if we try to evaluate the code with a syntax error. The syntax is similar to grammar in English. If you have not followed the syntax, the interpreter will return an error. Here the missing inverted comma will produce an error in this example. The type error. A type error is thrown if you use a value that is outside the range of expected types. The problem of the program is the attempt to convert a number to uppercase. Let's look at the summary. We discussed JavaScript error handling. We were going through try-catch statements, the final statements. We discussed range error. We also discussed reference error. Then we discussed syntax error. And at last, we discussed type error. That's all for this session. Let's meet in another session. Thank you. Hi everyone. Welcome all to the course Web Design for Beginners. I'm Lahir Vijayasekara, a solutions architect at Nagaro and a visiting lecturer. In this lesson, I'm going to discuss an introduction to XML and JSON. Let's look at the important color coding. These color codings will help you in preceding lecture slides. Let's look at an actual XML file and a JSON file. These two looks differ in appearance. The XML was there for years, and JSON came into the industry later in time. XML is often used for distributing data over the internet. XML stands for Extensible Markup Language. XML is a markup language much like HTML. XML was designed to store and transport data. XML was designed to be self-descriptive, and also XML is a W3C recommendation. XML does not use predefined tags like in HTML. We can define our own tags in XML. If you look at the example, not, date, and hour, these are the examples for user-defined tags in XML. Where can we use XML? It simplifies data sharing. It also simplifies data transport. It simplifies platform changes. It also simplifies data availability. Let's look at the JSON. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation, a text format for storing and transporting data. JSON is self-describing. This example helps us to see the JSON format. An employee is an object which has multiple properties like name, age, and city. The name is the key and John is the value here. The JSON has a key value pair as a concept here. This is another example for a JSON. Where can we use JSON? JSON is a lightweight data interchange format. JSON is used to send data between computers. JSON is language independent. Let's look at the summary. We discussed below topics. We discussed about XML. And we also discussed where can we use XML. Then we discussed about JSON. We also discussed about where can we use JSON in our solutions. That's all for this session. We will meet in another session. Thank you. Hi everyone, welcome all to the course Web Design for Beginners. I'm Lahir Vijayasekara, a solutions architect at Nagaro and a visiting lecturer. In this lesson, I'm going to discuss industry frameworks related to JavaScript. Let's look at important color coding. These color codings will help you in preceding lecture slides. TypeScript influence. TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript with design time support for type safety and tooling. TypeScript does not run in the web browser. You will wonder why. The code written in TypeScript is compiled to JavaScript first. Then the JavaScript runs in the browser. Angular is one of the well-known front-end technologies. AngularJS extends HTML attributes. If you want to become a full-stack developer, Angular is one of the key skills to have. Let's look at how Angular works. If you look at the diagram carefully, Angular is having modules or components. They have property binding, and also Angular is having injector services. They can connect with different components. There are defined templates as well. The templates and components are having property binding and event binding. These templates can communicate with different directives. They carry metadata as well. The architecture of an Angular application relies on certain fundamental concepts. The basic building blocks of the Angular framework are Angular components that are organized into ng modules. Ng modules collect related code into functional sets. An Angular application is defined by a set of ng modules. An application always has at least a root module that enables bootstrapping and typically has many more feature modules. React. This is also a key skill for a full stack developer to have. If you have the skills to manage React.js, you can develop front-end applications. If you have the skills to manage React Native, you can become a mobile app developer. React is a JavaScript library to build user interfaces. The React Native. This is a cross-platform for mobile application development. You may wonder, what is cross-platform? Once developed, you can compile and run the application in both iOS and in Android. React Native is similar to React, but it uses native components instead of using web components. React.js. This is one of the most powerful front-end JavaScript libraries. You can develop web applications in React.js easily. Vue.js is also a progressive JavaScript framework. This lets you extend the HTML capabilities. A lot of front-end developers used to develop in Vue.js due to its lightweight features. Let's look at the summary. We discussed about TypeScript influence. We also discussed about Angular, React, React Native, React.js, and at last about Vue.js. That's all for this session. We'll meet in another session. Thank you. Hi everyone, welcome all to the course Web Design for Beginners. I'm Lahir Vijayasekara, a solutions architect at Nagaro and a visiting lecturer. In this lesson, I'm going to discuss working with real-world data using Ajax and REST APIs. Let's look at the important color coding. These color codings will help you in preceding lecture slides. Ajax. The meaning of the Ajax is asynchronous JavaScript and XML. You should know that the Ajax is not a programming language. Then what is Ajax? Ajax has below two features as a combination. In a nutshell, it is the use of the XML HTTP request object to communicate with servers. The two major features of Ajax allows you to do following. Make request to the server without reloading the page. Receiving and work with data from the server. Let's try to understand how the browser communicates with the server here. A browser creates an XML HTTP request object. Then it sends it as a HTTP request via internet. The server receives it. It processes HTTP request. The server creates a response and send data back to the browser through internet. The browser processes the returned data using JavaScript. Then it updates the page content as required. Let's look at the REST APIs. REST is a protocol. You may wonder, what is a protocol? REST stands for Representational State Transfer. REST is a web standard based architecture and uses the HTTP protocol. The methods like GET provides read-only access to a resource. POST used to create new resources. Delete used to remove a response. Put used to update an existing resource or to create a new resource. The AJAX can communicate with REST APIs. You can use AJAX to send RESTful requests to an API. You can define the method of communication like GET or POST. You also can attach data as required. Let's look at the summary. We discussed about AJAX, REST APIs, and also AJAX and REST APIs together. That's all for this session. Let's meet in another session. Thank you. Welcome all to the course Web Design for Beginners. I'm Lahir Vijayasekara, a solutions architect at Nagaro and a visiting lecturer. In this lesson, I'm going to discuss basics of JavaScript web application hosting. Let's look at the important color coding. Web hosting is an interesting topic. Just imagine your first website that has been published on the internet. We need to understand the client-server architecture. The modern applications run on the client-server architecture. This architecture separates application software into two categories: servers and clients. The client and the server application can be hosted on the same machine, but it is more efficient and effective when the client and the server applications are hosted and executed on different machines connected to our network. A generic JavaScript application can have front-end and a back-end as below. Front-end with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Back-end, a node server that runs JavaScript. This is wonderful. JavaScript is everywhere. JavaScript can be hosted in multiple ways. One of the best solutions are Firebase hosting. Else, we can go for typical web hosting services. Firebase hosting is built for the modern web developer. Websites and apps are more powerful than ever with the rise of front-end JavaScript frameworks. If you take an example, Angular and static generated tools like Jekyll, the proper message has formed to be given to the user. Firebase is a good solution for any developer who is looking to deploy a JavaScript application. Let's look at a typical web hosting service. Usually, they are not specified for JavaScript, but they are compatible to run the JavaScript. If you are planning to host your JavaScript application in a typical hosting service, make sure to ask JavaScript versions that are compatible. Let's look at the summary. We discussed the client-server architecture. Then we move to JavaScript web application hosting. We also discussed Firebase hosting. At last, we discussed typical web hosting services. Let's meet in another lecture. Thank you very much.